pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Angie, have a roll call, please.
Holtkamp,
Here.
Gormanson,
Here.
Moody,
Here.
Odine, Prendergast,
Here.
Woolsey.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, next move on to approval of the minutes from the June 4th Plan Commission meeting.
I move to approve the minutes from June 4th.
Second.
First and second, questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
I'll abstain because I wasn't here.
it's okay.
I don't know if I can vote on something I wasn't here for it.
I think technically you can vote.
Yes.
And I'll vote to approve.
Okay. That's everybody. Okay, next, public comments. Is there somebody in the audience has anything like to stand up and talk about? Now would be the time. If not, we will move on to ordinance, public hearing on special use permit. So I'll close the council hearing and open up the public hearing on special use permit for an athlete facility batting cage at 1177 South Wasson Lane. Big Fish Performance. Harley's going to give us Harley is our senior planner. He's going to give us a presentation. And then if the public has any questions, they can ask. Otherwise, we'll move back into the planning commission. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harley.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the commission. As the mayor said, I'm Harley Melhorn, senior planner for the city. The first item before you tonight is Big Fish Performance, a request for a special use permit for an athletics training facility specializing in batting cages. By way of some background, the subject site is an existing commercial development located at 1177 South Wasson Lane, which is approximately a quarter mile south of Cascade on the west side of Wasson. The site is currently underutilized, being utilized primarily for storage. As aforementioned, this request is for an SUP, for an athletics training facility, and more specifically, a facility specializing in youth baseball training. The site is zoned B2 limited commercial, which allows for a number of uses by right and a number more by special use permit. Staff has found the proposed athletics training facility to be similar to a bowling alley, swimming pool, or amusement center, which are likewise permitted via SUP in the B2 district. The proposal includes minimal site modifications, the most profound of which is the installation of new asphalt surfacing for vehicular ingress and egress, and 4 parking stalls along the east side of the building. All parking is to be contained on the subject site, and access is provided indirectly through an access easement which runs perpendicular to the property and affords access to Wasson Lane. River Falls Municipal Code requires the Commission to evaluate a special use permit application based on the conditions on screen. City staff have examined each of the following conditions and found there to be no concerns. A more detailed staff analysis can be found within the meeting packet. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission approve the resolution for the SUP for the athletics training facility with the recommended conditions. With that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Harley. So we're in a public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience has anything they want to say about this? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and I'll reopen the planning commission hearing. And first I'll take a motion on this.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, and then
Second.
and then questions, comments. Yep.
I have one question. With the redevelopment of Wasson Lane that's underway now, is there an intention to put in like an actual driveway, or will the parking lot be just open to Wasson Lane?
Thank you. Commissioner, that's a good question. With the reworking, there's a few improvements that are happening on the property. First and foremost, it's a reworking of the kind of the drainage right along Wasson. That'll have no impact on the direct access to the site, except that there's an existing fairly unimproved access point on the south side that will be, for the time being, going away. So access will be primarily maintained off of the north. There will be somewhat of a buffer, though. It won't necessarily be open because there will be those basic improvements between and a sidewalk.
I have one quick question. Is there going to be a bathroom there or any kind of plumbing or anything like that?
That's a good question. I would defer to the applicant for the tenant improvement stuff.
Yeah, they can come up.
Okay.
I guess I have a question about the parking and the activity that is involved with people kind of maybe coming coming and going and having only 4 spots, and in the resolution, it sounds like everything has to be contained within that spot. We can't rely on overflow parking in another area. Is that correct?
Yeah, Commissioner, the intent behind that comment was actually to remove the possibility of things like the fire lane getting blocked by people parking within, proximal to the property. The intent is to have all the parking on those 4 spaces, or if more spaces are needed, to accommodate them on site through an additional site plan, change in the future, perhaps on the north side in the motor court or otherwise. When we evaluated this, we looked at this based on our code requirements for parking in general, and we found it to be analogous to a number of uses that meet that same ratio, which is about that 30% mark for maximum occupancy. It's also my understanding a lot of the training within this is going to be drop-off, pickup, or busing the training teams to the facility.
Okay. And just curious, I can't recall, and I wanted to take a look today, but it was very busy down there with construction. Is there street parking? I can't recall on.
There's
Wasson,
no-
there was no street parking.
No on-street parking.
Okay.
And the facility is not a public facility. It is just for the kids that are going to be coming there to train. So it's not going to be 20 people showing up for a batting party or anything. So
That's
it'll
my
be pretty contained. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Okay. So we have first and a second for the special use permit. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next, move on to housing data briefing. And Harley will once again bring us up to date.
Well, good evening again. The next item before you tonight is the Residential Code Amendment Phase 1 update. In May of this year, the Commission was briefed on the Comp Plan Implementation Phase 1 code amendments that staff was exploring. We're here before you today to provide an update and seek some feedback. This presentation will have broadly 4 sections. The first, we will briefly retouch on the Comp Plan guidance, then go over data that staff has collected, go over the interpretation of that data, and finally touch on next steps. As a reminder, the comp plan has an implementation chapter and a section for each of the major elements of the comp plan. For the purpose of phase 1, we will be starting with items from the housing and land use elements. The first item we have selected is to update the zoning code to support the land use categories of the land use chapter. Currently, there is a conflict between the recommended densities within the technical memorandum of the land use chapter and code. This item seeks to rectify that, which would immediately provide for the opportunity for more flexible and available housing typologies on existing lot stock. The 2 housing items that we have selected are harmonious with that of the land use item. Firstly, to update the zoning ordinance to support density and development that accommodates the missing middle housing typology. And secondly, to consider the adoption of alternative housing options, most notably of which are accessory dwelling units or ADUs. To begin to formulate an approach towards achieving the goals as laid out by the comp plan, we began by collecting a lot of data. We collected data on our existing R1 lot stock and their conformance to size standards of code and existing dispersion of our missing middle housing typology, including the location and the density thereof. Upon researching the size standards, staff found that the mean R1 single-family lot size is 11,542 square feet, and that the mean R1 duplex lot size is only slightly larger at 12,950 square feet. Surprisingly, the instances of sub 5,000 square foot lots, which is the absolute bare minimum that code allows, accepting certain lot widths, across the entire city was less than 1/10% of a single percent. I believe it came out to something like 20 lots across the entire city. As visualized, the density of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are converted to a heat map. Clear patterns regarding clustering begin to appear. There are generally 2 major clusters of this R1 middle housing, one proximal to City Hall, both on the north and south side of Division, and the other between Division and Cascade on the east side of Maine. Code currently allows duplexes in R1 provided they have a 1,400-foot separation from each other, or in larger developments not to exceed 2 acres. The existing stock of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in R1 illustrates that these provisions have not been adhered to in the oldest and most established parts of the city. The average separation between duplexes across the city in R1 is 158 feet, far less than the code requirement. The existing stock of missing middle blends well into the streetscape and does not generate a higher level of complaints regarding traffic or other density factors as compared to purely single-family areas. The natural development of the city lended itself towards integrated mixed housing densities and provides a potential template for future code allowances. So upon evaluating the data, staff found that lot size was likely not a major direct contributor to impeding housing availability, though found that a reduction in the overall lot size requirement could prove beneficial, especially when considering densities higher than 1 dwelling unit per lot. Interestingly, given the average single-family R1 lot and average R1 duplex were less than 1,500 square feet apart, staff found that this potentially indicates that the lot size requirement may not need to directly scale 1-to-1 with density, and instead, as long as parking, setbacks, and other requirements can be met, similar lot sizes between housing typologies could actually help in integration within existing neighborhoods. The existing lot stock of middle housing was surprising and potentiates a framework for future code allowances, specifically a density increase in our R1 district. So the next steps from here are to get feedback from the commission on our direction here tonight, and then come back in late fall with some specific code language recommendations, including potential provisions for the allowance of ADUs. Staff will also be leveraging a consultant to evaluate the multifamily development standard code so the vision of the comp plan guidance can also be realized at all densities, with the consultant especially focusing on open space ratios and amenities for multifamily. So with that, Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time, and we'd love any feedback or question that the commission has.
Questions? So just so I'm on the right page, ADUs is additional dwelling units?
Accessory dwelling unit, Mr. Mayor.
Accessory dwelling.
Yep. It's a dwelling unit that's subordinate to the main unit.
Yep, okay.
Garage apartments, Fonzie's.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I'm actually doing a similar thing in Ellsworth right now, working with them to revise their zoning codes, and we're actually talking about maybe allowing triplexes in the R1. We're just gonna, kind of copy what Minneapolis did. Which when I told them that, they're like, "Oh, I don't know if we want to be like Minneapolis," but regardless, has there been any discussion around allowing potentially triplexes on maybe some larger lots? And I think one of the hangups that happened in Minneapolis that didn't allow as much redevelopment as they were hoping for was that the setbacks and parking requirements ended up being a barrier. So is there any discussion around some of those things within the R1 district or some of the other zoning districts to give more flexibility? Like allowing duplexes is fine, but if you still have a 30-foot front setback and all that, it may preclude some of the opportunities that would otherwise exist. So has there been any looking at that, or is that part of this conversation?
That's a good question, Commissioner. Absolutely, that has come up in discussion, certainly regarding the triplexes. When looking at this and discussing, our existing code framework directly already allows for duplexes within R1. So that was kind of considered that low-hanging fruit, 80% of our benefit from 20% of changes. However, in the future, certainly we would like to look at a potential increase in density. As we've also found of doing research, a lot of cities are actually going away from traditional dwelling units per acre entirely, and instead focusing on things like performance standards and form-based codes. So I think this is going to be certainly a phased approach. Maybe with this, we do look at triplexes. Maybe it's in a future update as we consider the totality of adjustments made through the comp plan and kind of refine it as we realize what these changes implicate for utilities, for density, for all these different provisions that we're looking at. Regarding the question on lot standard deviations, that's certainly part of the conversation as well. That being said, our R1 district in comparison to other cities is already fairly lax. Not saying that there couldn't be allowances afforded, but we already allow for an averaged front yard setback in historic areas. And further, our side yard setbacks, I think, are only 5 feet, in the rear is only 10. And so especially with the historical lot sizes that we have, especially in the context of not having too many sub 5,000 square foot lots, most of the benefit would likely come from a direct density allowance.
And then also, particularly with the ADUs, are y'all considering requirements for, additional parking, or I would push for ADUs to be allowed without additional parking, just because it just makes the cost so much more and you end up with more lot coverage and all those things. So that would just be something I would suggest to look at, is allowing for ADUs without parking, because especially if it is gonna be like a granny flat and you're moving in mother-in-law, there may not be a need for that extra parking.
Certainly, yeah, and that's something we're looking at. A couple of things that we talked about is allowing for what some people call encumbered parking. So, for instance, if you have a garage, that counts as your required off-street, but then the driveway leading to it could be considered an additional space, even though it would be blocking that's a potential avenue. Or utilizing on-street parking, or otherwise demonstrating that there's no need. We just don't have the data on it yet, but that's certainly something we're open to if our streets can accommodate it.
I know my street can, because it's like 40 feet wide.
Sure.
So there's
Yeah,
plenty of
there you
room
go.
to park cars on the street there and still allow the plows to get by without any problem. So
Yep.
our streets are pretty much wide enough most everywhere, I'd suggest. But
I just had a quick question. So your presentation, you talked about parking for duplexes, neighborhoods with a lot of duplexes and fourplexes and stuff. The parking there, if I heard you right, we had less issues with that parking than we did in single-family neighborhoods?
It was analogous. So there was a similar level of complaint or problem in
Okay.
each of those neighborhoods. Yeah. What we did find is, obviously a direct correlation between utilization of on-street parking and a lack of on-site parking. So for instance, in a lot of our more historic neighborhoods, due to a lack of driveways in the front, there's more of a utilization of the on-street versus something like Sterling Ponds. However, we did not find an increase in problematic complaints in looking through, what we field from the public.
Okay. Interesting. So you guys are gonna do research, come up with some suggestions and come back to us? And we can discuss it more?
Yep.
so is there any kind of public engagement that's going along with this, or are y'all talking to just, because people always get all head up when you start talking about zoning changes. So I'm just curious if there's any of that going on.
I don't think we've directly had that conversation, but I think as we're looking at this, we're considering this to be really part of the comp plan implementation, that a lot of this engagement was kind of front loaded during that comp plan process, since we're just executing the guidance that was delivered down through that public engagement process.
That's all fun and games till you change someone's zoning, though. That meeting might be full. Well, we may have to plan for that one, because there may be people all fired up about it. Cool, I love it. I think it's great.
Yep. But anybody else have any questions? Okay, thanks, Harley. Okay, and then Emily's got our planning update.
Yep, and the only thing I have for you is we have reformatted our monthly report, if you saw that at the end of the packet. And so the intent with that was to focus on the council strategic initiatives and how the community development department is working to achieve those, as well as including the other key work plan items that are part of community development. So to more easily track our progress on those key areas. So if you have any questions about that or feedback on it, we'd welcome that.
Perfect.
Looks good, easy to read.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you like a motion to adjourn? I'd like to
Usually
make a
do.
motion to adjourn.
Usually do that.
Second?
I'm doing it.
First and second to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm used.